Welcome to Dot Point S9, and today we're looking at the practices that have led to one important soil degradation problem, the outcomes of these practices on the land and water system, and current recommended procedures to alleviate the problem. So you could have talked about any of these couple of things here. These are all soil degradation problems. So we've got erosion, salinity, acidification, and also soil structural decline. Now, I'm guessing most people have done erosion or salinity. For this one, I've chosen erosion, and thanks to Ruby for letting me use her sheet here. So let's firstly name and define the soil degradation problem. So erosion is when soil particles are either blown or washed away, obviously via wind or water, and resulting in the loss of topsoil, reduced nutrient availability to plants, and increased fertilizer costs. So this top couple of centimeters of soil is where about 80 or 90% of the nutrients in the soil are. So if we lose that top couple of centimeters, then we lose a lot of the productivity of our soil and the soil fertility. So you get various types of erosion. Sheet erosion is removal of layers of topsoil over a large area. Rill erosion is where you get small channels washed away. Gully erosion is what we commonly see in Australia, where we get deep gullies are formed running through farm areas. And then tunnel erosion is where you get really wet water, really wet soil, moving and washing soil away underneath, but the top remains intact, and basically eventually the top will cave in, but you get erosion heading underneath the soil initially. And these all occur depending on the soil type. So different soil types tend to favor different types of erosion. So what are some farming practices that have caused these problems? So basically continuous cultivation, when we're constantly plowing the soil, it breaks down the soil structure over time. It tends to leave less ground cover on the surface. It can also lead to compaction, and basically as soon as you get water or wind hitting soil that doesn't have much ground cover and has broken down the soil structure, that is like a perfect recipe for erosion to occur. Also continuous grazing, so if you've got animals just constantly on an area of land and having hard-hoofed cattle in particular, such as near riverbanks, etc., that will also cause erosion. The next one is burning stubble. So this is kind of again reducing ground cover. If you have stubble after a crop and you burn it, it removes most of the cover on the soil, and that will then allow wind and water to erode it. Also over irrigation and flooding, of obviously having too much water on the surface, can cause soil to erode as well. And that soil ends up in waterways, and one of the next dot points is looking at the quality of water. And basically we're losing the soil and then it's going into waterways mostly, which is a problem for the waterways. So let's outline the effects of the problem on land and water production. So the loss of the nutrient-rich topsoil and organic matter occurs in the top couple of centimeters. You get less plant growth due to loss of soil structure, which is obviously decreasing your yields. You get increased turbidity in the waterways, and if you're using that as irrigation, that's bad. It can cause lots of problems with pumps and just the water quality as well. And then also loss of productive farmland, because you're decreasing the fertility of the soil in areas where it is eroded. So obviously here you're getting this cycle where you get erosion occurring, then you get a loss of organic matter in topsoil, breakdown of soil structure, therefore you get less plant growth, and when there's less plant growth and ground cover, you get more erosion. And so you're getting this kind of downward spiral that just keeps getting worse. It also can change the flow of rivers and creeks and changes the path due to sediment buildup, and that can be bad, obviously in riverbeds for obvious reasons. So what are some current recommended practices to alleviate the problem? Firstly, you can fence off impacted creek areas or impacted areas that have gully erosion and prevent animals from getting into it. This prevents it from getting worse, and it's important to avoid it getting worse by animals kind of traipsing and trying to get down the side of the gully, and they cause more erosion with their hooves. You could also plant windbreaks, because remember, one of the two main causes other than water is wind of erosion. And if you plant windbreaks on your farm, that's going to slow the wind flow down on your farm, and therefore that's going to help reduce erosion by wind. The next thing is minimum tillage. So if you reduce the breakdown of soil structure by reducing the amount that you plow, this is going to help conserve organic matter and topsoil and soil structure, and that's going to reduce erosion as well. Putting in flumes, so you'll have seen this on year 12 excursion, where it's like on Ross Thompson's farm, where you have a large concrete kind of almost dam where it's taking the water from a high point down to a low point, and that basically stops erosion from occurring, because if the water has to go from a high point to a low point with bare soil, it's obviously going to cause lots of erosion when it hits the bottom. But this takes it from a high point to a low point, and takes the energy out of the water so that it doesn't further erode any soil down the bottom. And then lastly, riparian zones and grass waterways are also a good method to help reduce soil erosion, and you'll look at those a little bit more in coming dot points. So in terms of past questions, this was asked a lot about in 2014, so it might be due for a question on this soon. So name a soil degradation problem. The question or the answer there would be soil erosion for this one. The majority of soil nutrients are in the top few centimeters of organic matter on the soil surface. Soil erosion via wind or water leads to the loss of this organic topsoil, and hence a significant decrease in productive potential. The introduction of hard-hoofed animals. This is the next question, sorry. Explain how a farming practice can lead to this soil degradation problem. The introduction of hard-hoofed animals has led to an increased compaction of soil and therefore decreased porosity of soil and ability to support plant life. This reduction in ground cover leads to an increase in area exposed to wind and water, and hence erosion occurs. For 2 marks, that one. This next one, describe procedures which can be used to alleviate or prevent this soil degradation problem. So obviously it's procedures, you need to have 2. So I've clearly shown my 2 here. Number 1, fencing of impacted and creek areas. These areas are either already eroded or subject to high chance of erosion. Removing stock access through fencing means increased ability of plants to grow, therefore higher ground cover, therefore decreased erosion occurring. And number 2, planting windbreaks, slowing wind down on a farm, and particularly in areas of high erosion, can slow wind across the soil surface and hence reduce erosion potential. This question here is really basically the same as the previous question, so you should see the answer for that. And this question, for soil degradation problem, explain farm management practices that have contributed to the problem and a procedure that can be used to alleviate. So Ruby's answered this one, and you can read it, but it's got 1, 2 things that have caused it to occur and 1 and 2 things to alleviate the problem.